Welcome back to Truth to Tell. I'm Michelle Ali-Murati.
And I'm Andy Driscoll. And a couple of weeks ago, Josh Wise of the Fair Trade Coalition dropped by to spend 5 minutes talking about Congressman Keith Ellison's then pending forum later that day on the continuing negotiations around what's called the looming Transpacific Partnership, so-called Free Trade Pact. The 18th round of those negotiations now underway. I think, after 3 years now? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, normally TTT is less concerned with subjects like the TPP, and that we are in many states. I've just lost my script. How about that? Here we are. However, local and regional transnational corporations like 3M, Cargill, ADM, Alliant Tech, the now ubiquitous Target Corporation. I think it has its name on practically every building in the city now. Cities, right? And who knows what others are the mute participants in this trade negotiation, a trade organization that has the potential for preempting and overriding all U.S. and local laws and regulations. This is nothing to mess with.
We say mute for all the push by the U.S. Trade Representative's Office toward recruiting those Minnesota corporations. Not only will none of them say anything about their part in this effort to solidify laws, rules, and regulations in what could seem like a separate government over our governments, the entire negotiating process looks to be underway entirely in secret. The U.S. government trade representative site says much but little in the way to clarify the effects of this treaty, and it does say that the great goal in all these pacts is the business of free trade, and that is trade without a shred of restriction on business practices, probably needing some brakes applied to them.
Today, the guests that we have today, we think explain the concerns of those watching these global trade agreements appear in every corner of the planet, as well as whatever details investigative reporters have been able to get leaked from these secret negotiations, and a number of them seem to have done so. Congressman Keith Ellison will join this conversation a bit later in the hour, but let's meet two of the people in Minnesota who are tracking this trade pact, being called the Transpacific Partnership Agreement, with an eye to concerns over fair trade versus free trade, and that they contain great disparities. But as I understand it, it's all about secrecy.
We have with us today Josh Wise. Josh returns to expand on his brief remarks a couple of weeks ago here and explain how his organization, the Minnesota Fair Trade Coalition, is spreading the word on the concerns being raised over its impact on Minnesota businesses and consumers. Josh is executive director of the Minnesota Fair Trade Coalition, and we welcome him back to Truth to Tell. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you, Josh. Pleasure. And shame on us for this being the first time we've brought Steve Fletcher on. Steve's odyssey as a community organizer and social economic scholar, as we see it, is well known around here, having founded Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, what people around here call the NOC, then dashing off to start his doctorate work in New York City and returning to become a fellow and director of grassroots strategy for Minnesota 2020, another fairly absent organization on TTT, and one of these days we'll figure out why. One of the active policy analysis organizations in the state over the last few years. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And again, Representative Keith Ellison will join us toward the bottom of the hour. And you can give us your questions and comments as a part of this conversation as well on the impact of these global trade agreements on our local economies and workers by calling us at 612-341-0980, 612-341-0980. And you can also tweet your comments to Andy at TTT Andy Driscoll. You could also do hashtag TruthToTell. And you can also post your comments on Truth to Tell's Facebook page at facebook.com/TruthToTell. And we'll get to as many of those as we can during the hour.
Okay, I also want to say to you all that we keep forgetting to tell people if you want to watch us live right now, you can find us at livestream.com/truth-to-tell-men, MN. And we're actually right there, and you can watch this show, see what all these guys look like. Otherwise, it'll be up on video later on afterward. And Craig Stellmacher is our videographer, as always. Glad to have him here. All right, well, guys, let's go over this trade agreement slowly and get as much as we can in on this. Clearly, before ripping it apart, Josh, start us out, if you will, and then Steve can jump in and talk about what folks in the streets can do and about this if we can generate enough interest on it, because frankly, one can see why one would feel fairly powerless in doing anything about this business. Josh Wise is of the Minnesota Fair Trade Coalition. Josh, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Well, the Transpacific Partnership is the largest free trade agreement the United States has ever undertaken to negotiate.
NAFTA was, this is bigger than NAFTA?
That's right. NAFTA was 3 countries, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. This is 12 countries at the moment. It's Canada, the United States, and Mexico, so the NAFTA countries. And then throw into the mix other countries in on the Pacific Rim. So right now it's Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, and then Peru and Chile. And just recently, Japan joined the TPP. So it's 12 countries.
All on either side of the Pacific Ocean.
That's correct.
And what is Brunei?
Well, Brunei it's a very small country. It's ruled by a sultan.
Okay.
So, but the TPP right now encompasses just under 40% of the entire world's economy. It has what's in it a docking provision so that other countries can join at any time. Like I said, Japan just recently joined. And it's open to any country with a border on the Pacific Ocean. So if all the eligible countries joined, it would be 60% of the entire global economy. Not only is this the largest in scale...
60%?
Yep, 60% of the entire global economy.
That's huge.
Not only is the scale very large, but the scope of what's being negotiated, we've learned, is also the most that it's ever been. When NAFTA passed, we were largely dealing with the transfer of goods, right? So we export corn, they export tractors. As free trade negotiations have evolved, they've gone to encompass things like government procurement, how we spend our tax money and who's eligible to bid on public projects. Now, it covers goods, services, and ideas. In the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they're going after what's called intellectual property.
Yeah.
And this affects everything from your behavior on the internet to your access to affordable medicines
through
drug patents.
How are they going to control that?
Well, they want to extend the patents on drugs. The SOPA legislation from 2 years ago, Stop Online Piracy Act, the day the internet went black in protest, is being included there. There's no way it could have ever gotten through Congress, but they're using trade negotiations to push similar language.
They are. And this is now in secret.
So this is, and what it shows is that this really isn't about trade. This is about the ability of private corporations to control the commons, to have ownership and access to every part of our lives. And because they haven't been able to do it through normal U.S. lawmaking process, they're relying on secret international trade negotiations in order to ram this through.
Steve, fill in any blanks you can feel.
Well, I think the really important thing is the end around democratic processes, right? I mean, the thing that we're seeing is laws that would not pass in the light of day if they had to go through Congress. Corporations are looking for a way to get it done, and they're moving to limit our power as people in a democracy to influence the way our economy works. So, for example, in Minnesota, I mean, if you just think about the victories in the last legislative cycle that progressives have been excited about, if you think about ban the box, if you think about the healthcare exchange.
Ban the box is, we have to remind people.
Sure. So ban the box was a regulation on the way corporations recruit employees, so that they can't ask about felony convictions when you're applying for a job.
Okay.
Right.
So, and this actually passed in Minnesota this year.
Absolutely, it did, and it was a huge victory. Take Action and
Second Chance,
and a huge group of organizations worked on that, and it was really exciting. The Minnesota Healthcare Exchange is one of the best in the country. And Minnesota has always regulated healthcare. We've always regulated, we've only allowed nonprofit healthcare corporations here, which is not to say that they're not,
which is why
United a ridiculous amount of money.
Cannot operate in Minnesota, for instance. They're a for-profit organization.
So there's we have always made choices as a democracy to regulate corporations. And what's happening now is these corporations are essentially trying to find a way to circumvent that and to limit our ability to do that. So here's an example. If we wanted to require, if we're going to spend tax money and we wanted to require that money gets spent with local contractors, that could be in violation of this trade agreement. This trade agreement is not supposed to, is trying to limit our ability to restrict trade, not just for goods like cars, which is what people usually think about, right? It's like
tariffs on goods. But for job creation right here at home. But for job creation right here at home. And so if we wanted to limit the way our tax dollars get spent here in Minnesota, we're going to lose our rights to do that.
So I think for most people, when they think of free trade, they think of a wider access to products and lower prices here locally when they buy things. Is that at all directly tied to what we're talking about here?
Well,
Josh White.
How does the average person think that this relates to them?
Right. Well, that's definitely the corporate line on this, right? Yeah. Is that it's going to increase U.S. exports and it's going to lower prices for goods here. What we've seen historically is that it's been the hollowing out of good paid jobs in the United States. Minnesota alone has lost about 14,000 manufacturing jobs to Mexico after NAFTA. We lost about 70,000 total jobs to China in the last 10 years after permanent normal trade relations were granted.
But are we talking about like manufacturing jobs?
Now we're talking about just about every kind of job you can think of.
Okay.
Recently,
with TPP you are.
Absolutely, but even in other free trade agreements, we've seen things extend to legal services, to the healthcare industry.
How does it affect legal services?
Basically it opens up the market so that foreign firms can do legal work. And technology has made it so that if you have a bunch of legal documentation that you need reviewed, you can just send it to the lowest bidder, which in this case actually ends up being in a lot of the countries in the Pacific Rim, India as well. And they'll do it for pennies on the dollar. A lot of jobs that historically have required a high degree of education are now being able to be outsourced.
Now, it does seem to me that this sort of forces some local corporations to get sucked in to being a party to this agreement in order to get work. Is that right?
Well, everybody's going to get sucked into this, right? The idea is that this essentially undoes a lot of the local rules of the game. And so
in other words, if Minnesota has a law that says that certain percentages, let's say, of things that are business that is done in this state has to come from local corporations or local labor or however that's constructed, certainly our cities and counties have a lot of labor pacts in place.
That's correct.
That would say, all right, now you have to use union labor for construction purposes. You have to meet certain worker conditions that would apply across the board for safety, and then you'd have consumer protections built in. So is this the stuff you're saying is going to be like preempted?
Yes. So the city of Minneapolis, for example, has an ordinance that privileges local purchases on an environmental basis, right? So that we don't have to ship things all around the world.
Exactly, right.
In order to get them. It's a perfectly logical thing. It seems like a perfectly reasonable thing that our elected representatives would do. What what this opens us up to, and what we've seen in previous trade agreements, but this seems to be opening a much bigger hole is for a foreign corporation to sue the city of Minneapolis, saying that we are depriving them of their opportunity to profit under the trade agreement, and that we're in violation of the trade agreement. And the bigger problem, and Josh can speak more to this, I think he understands the mechanism a little better, is that this doesn't get worked out in the U.S. courts. This gets worked out in a special trade court that's going to be looking at this stuff, that's essentially staffed by the corporations that are writing the agreement.
Really?
Let me
Josh,
let me give you two examples that are relevant to Minnesota. So ever since NAFTA, there's been this thing called the investor-state dispute settlement, which basically gives a foreign corporation...
Say that again.
Investor-state dispute settlement, which basically gives a
Sounds
foreign
like
corporation...
something else to go around the consumer. Or
exactly.
The
What it does is it enables foreign corporations to circumvent the normal judicial process, and if they believe a regulation in a local government or a country has affected their future expected profits, money they think they're going to make down the road, they're able to sue that government, not in the normal judicial system, but through what's called a trade tribunal. And these end up being panels of 3 lawyers who, in their spare time, work mostly for the corporations who are doing this transnational business. Now, 2 examples. The first is a recent award that Cargill got from the government of Mexico for $77 million because Mexico was limiting the import of high fructose corn syrup. Now, if you haven't heard, Mexico recently overtook the United States as the most obese country in the world.
Hear that.
is that right?
So, so as part of their public health measures, they were limiting high fructose corn syrup production. Cargill sued, and Mexico overturned the regulation several years ago because of the suit, but then just recently had to pay Cargill $77 million. The second
as a settlement thing?
As a settlement. This was a settlement that came...
Because their regulation was interfering with Cargill's profits.
That's exactly right. The second example that could have future implications for Minnesota is a case where a company called Lone Pine Resources is suing Canada for Quebec's moratorium on fracking. Quebec had issued this moratorium saying we need to study the long-term effects of fracking. Lone Pine Resources is currently suing them, and I forget the amount that it's for. This case was just filed. But this could have a lot of implications for Minnesota's regulations on sand mining.
This is incredible.
So the thing that is most intriguing to me is you have all these people running on the jobs platform saying that they're going to create jobs and that they're going to, find ways to bring jobs back to Minnesota, but nobody, or even on the national scale, nobody's talking about this free trade agreement as being, a hindrance to that. Why is nobody talking about this?
Well,
in the same conversation.
There's there's this economic theory that if we all focus on what we produce most efficiently, then everyone benefits, right? And we trade with each other. The flaw in that is it doesn't really say who in the country benefits. So what we have is this mechanism where capital just keeps flowing up to the richest 1%, right? The corporate shareholders are actually doing pretty well from these free trade agreements. But what we've seen is that in order to increase their profits, they're willing to sacrifice the domestic market, right? Most of what is produced in this country still gets sold domestically, and that's another way Minnesota companies are going to lose, is because the vast majority of Minnesota firms are selling to Minnesotans and to the United States. There are those that are exporting, but the export market is much smaller than the domestic market. But what they really want to do is they want to, because the United States consumer market is and for the foreseeable future will be the largest consumer market in the world by a far. These countries want to set up, or companies want to set up their production in low-wage, low-regulation countries and then export the goods back.
Back to us, where we pay theoretically lower prices for those goods. It's interesting that they are able to maintain a price point as a result of all of this exporting of jobs. Is there some way, is that sort of a way of being able to keep down middle class wages in this country, Steve?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the only way, and I don't know if you guys saw the McDonald's budget that got put out.
Oh, yes, I did.
Where McDonald's tried to put out a tool for their workers to help them understand how they could survive on the wages they were getting from McDonald's.
Really?
You haven't seen this?
And it was actually a huge PR mistake, right? Because it ended up revealing that it's
It was
in fact
ridiculous.
impossible to survive on the wages that they were being paid. But absolutely, there's a strategy where like you can't pay as low as you're paying at McDonald's if you don't have Walmart. Right, like you have to have a place for those workers to shop where they can afford with their low wages.
That was sort of the point I was trying to make.
Yeah,
good.
and so driving down all of those things, those things work hand in hand in the same way that an upward spiral, where if we all paid people well and gave people good wages where they could spend real money for quality goods,
especially food,
that could actually be a great upward cycle. And we definitely need to talk about food in just a minute because the trade agreement goes way into that. But the other point that I wanted to make was in thinking about these trade agreements. I mean, we have a situation right now where, the leadership in some places, and Canada's negotiating this thing, right? One of their provinces doesn't want to allow something profitable in that would improve their tax base, and they're trying to figure out a way around that. They're trying to figure out a way around a democratic government within their own country. In a lot of cases, that's what the U.S. government is doing as well. When we talk about jobs, it doesn't just matter how many jobs, it matters what kind of jobs, right? I mean, we can create we can create a ton of jobs by doing this. We can create a ton of jobs because we're going to go in and create environmental catastrophes, and then we create jobs doing the cleanup too. So we create the jobs to create the catastrophe, and we create the job to clean up the catastrophe. And if you count that as just all jobs and it's all positive,
sounds great. Let's do it.
Hey,
wonderful.
We're job creators, but I just think we've got to hold the Obama administration accountable to say, look, they should get credit for a short-term recovery, but if they negotiate this thing, they should also get credit for a long-term crash, and we're really scared.
We have a call on the phone. Steve wants to make a comment. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
Great show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, it's not being talked about enough. But my point is this, that already in Minnesota, we have state contracts being handed out, I think more often than not, and I can't substantiate that, but I'm going to hazard a guess. And that is that there are state contracts going out not only for building big projects, but also for millions of dollars in consulting fees. We don't tend to hire at home.
You mean we as a country?
As a state. I'm talking about the state of Minnesota.
All right.
I'm talking about that in relationship to this specific trade agreement.
Yes, okay, go ahead.
How our bargaining rights and our ability to keep dollars at home are going to be at risk through this trade agreement. But my point is this, that is already happening. And if you look at the building of the 35W bridge that went to an out-of-state company, and it was pointed out to me that the building of the Viking Stadium is going to a Texas company, and I know for a fact. I mean, I've heard that we've had endless consultants studying various kinds of economic impacts on the state that have been hired from outside corporations in other states, and I'm just saying that is already taking place without a trade agreement.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. Let's see what our guys have to say about all this.
Yeah,
and we thank you for calling.
Thanks a lot. Great show. Bye.
Thank you.
We'll do a quick response to that comment.
Josh, and then we'll go.
Sure.
Josh Wise.
I think the handing out of state contracts to other states is a somewhat separate issue, but I will say, for the Viking Stadium, for example, there is going to be a prevailing wage. There is going to be a project labor agreement that takes place. So there are some safeguards within the law for Minnesota workers. Now, obviously, that could be improved upon, as the caller points out. But, had for example, a different trade agreement called the General Agreement on Trade and Services actually moved forward. This was something through the World Trade Organization. It basically would have banned that prevailing wage and project labor agreement provision. So a French construction firm, for example, could bid with the lowest bid. We would have to accept that bid. They could import labor from the Philippines, this is all hypothetical, but they could import labor from the Philippines, have them live in company housing and pay them less than $10 an hour, and there would be nothing at all that we could do about it. So those safeguards are in place,
yes,
but the global corporate elite are constantly trying to pick away at them. That's happening in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It definitely will happen with the pending European agreement, it's something they've tried before, but we've been able to beat it back so far.
If you've just joined us, we're talking with advocates for putting the brakes on what seems like a railroad train of trade, seeking completely free trade, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And our guests thus far have been Josh Wise, who is Executive Director of the Minnesota Fair Trade Coalition, and Steve Fletcher, who's a fellow and head of the Grassroots Strategy Division of Minnesota 2020. Following these breaks, we'll come back, and we think that Congressman Keith Ellison will be with us. So we'll ask you to stay with us.
Yes, and also you can still contribute to the conversation. Give us your questions and comments on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement by calling 612-341-0980, 612-341-0980, or tweet your comments, hashtag TruthToTell, or post your questions and comments on Truth to Tell's Facebook page, Facebook.com/TruthToTell.
And we'll remind you that we're up at livestream.com /TruthToTell MN, and
yes, and stay with us. Truth to Tell will be right back after this short break.
Yep.
And right now, back to the conversation around the implications of the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. You can join the conversation by calling us at 612-341-0980, 612-341-0980. You can also tweet us. Just use hashtag TruthToTell, or post your questions and comments on Truth to Tell's Facebook page, facebook.com/TruthToTell. And don't forget, you can watch us live streaming at livestream.com/TruthToTellMin. There. Was that enough information for you? We'll get back to the conversation.
Well, we were waving our hands here in front of the camera because we weren't sure. I wasn't sure whether
I knew that we had him on the phone, but I didn't get a chance to tell you.
So we welcome Congressman Keith Ellison to the show. Just a couple of weeks ago, Representative Ellison conducted a forum on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Still in negotiation, Congressman Ellison co-chairs the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is a member of the U.S. House Financial Services Committee, and he is founder of the Congressional Consumer Justice Caucus, so it fits right in. Representative Ellison, welcome back to TTT.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be with you today.
Delighted to have you. So talk about your role, will you, in all of this, and what the forum was about, and what provisions bother you the most.
Well, we have this trade agreement that is being proposed called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It involves countries like the United States, of course, but also Vietnam, also countries like perhaps it could include Burma, could include Japan, could include Peru. It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it is being negotiated now. And it is in this particular Trans-Pacific Partnership is not being disclosed to members of Congress, and
you're talking about the provisions of that agreement have not been revealed to Congress?
No, they're not. There are 600 advisors to the agreement who are given waivers to see it. But we're not being allowed to see it.
You have to have a waiver to be able to see it?
What's that?
Who grants the waiver, Congressman?
Well, the USTR, the United States Trade Representative.
Oh, so U.S. Trade Representative has to waiver?
This person has a diplomatic status, and so they have certain diplomatic rights like any ambassador would. And therefore, there are certain things that they can maintain secret, and other things that they can reveal to others. No, members of Congress do not have general right to know about the provision. Now, we can ask about pieces of it. We can ask, what is the provision on Vietnam? What is the provision on food inspection? What is the provision on local preference stuff like Buy America? We can ask that, and they will send us back letters, and the letters contain some information, but quite frankly, they're pretty general. And so you asked me, what are some of the provisions that I do know about that are concerning me? One is that it would prohibit Buy American provisions.
Okay.
Another is that it would have single point inspection. What that means is that if the fish is inspected if the fish is inspected in Vietnam, then it is deemed to be inspected, and there wouldn't be an American inspection. And if we couldn't really reject a batch of fish or other food because it did not pass our standards of inspection.
We have in our studio with us as well, Representative Ellison. We have Josh Wise of the Fair Trade Coalition.
Oh, he knows a lot about that.
And Steve Fletcher of Minnesota 2020, they've been both doing some organizing around this issue. And we've been spending the last half hour sort of dissecting parts of this trade agreement that would not be friendly to consumers and workers, certainly here in Minnesota, which is what this program is often about. So we are concerned about the national secrecy around this, and I think that sounds like it's one of your major focus.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is if it's so good, and they tell us, oh, this is going to bring us jobs. Well, they told us NAFTA was going to bring us jobs. Actually, Minnesota has lost jobs because of NAFTA. But if it's so good, then why not freely share what's in it?
Mm-hmm.
And they're not doing that. And so it seems to me that, I mean, it is like most trade agreements. It's a way for international corporations to find the lowest cost, lowest regulatory environment, and produce things in that environment, and then sell it in the highest price market and in the biggest market, which is the United States. So, they want to basically basically exploit labor around the world for cheap and then sell it here.
So they can.
And that disemploys us, and then for the workers over there. I mean, you look at a country like Bangladesh. Many workers just got killed when a factory collapsed. Do we as Americans really want to have a cheap goods based on the fact that people are living in unsafe working conditions abroad?
So let me ask you this, Congressman Ellison. If this is all being done essentially shrouded in secrecy, and not even Congress can really have a strong influence on how the final negotiations play out, I mean, what, if anything, can the American people do to fight against this? I mean, is it just boycotts? I mean, what do you do?
No, I would say before we get to boycott, I'd say the first thing is to demand that the administration voluntarily waive the secrecy provisions and
so the president has the ability to
publish it.
Okay.
And Congressman, why isn't Congress sort of up in arms over this, or at least I haven't seen it.
This is also an excellent question, and I can offer my opinion. Right, others will have opinions.
Okay.
One is that there are members of Congress who do like these trade deals. There are members of Congress. There is support for this stuff here. Many of us who criticize these trade deals that were called protectionists, I actually am not a protectionist. I believe in trade, and I do export promotion all the time. And I believe we're going to have some imports too. But what I want is a fair trade model that enhances both countries, not diminishes both. Basically, the trade deals we've had are good for international investors, but they're not good for workers, and they're certainly not good for the environment. And so that's all we're demanding. So the one reason is that there is a constituency for these deals here, particularly for the people who believe it's their job to represent the special interests.
The corporations that are rooted in their states and things like that, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the other thing is that the reason that Congress is not as up in arms as it should be is that a lot of people don't know about it. I mean, it's very important for constituents to know that Congress is made up of regular people. It is made up of regular people, and the volume of information sprayed out at us at one moment, very few people could digest at once.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but if I were to go pluck somebody up the streets of Minneapolis and put them in my job, they would spend most of the day trying to just figure out what's going on.
Well, they'd be pulling their hair out. I can see that.
It's not that. It's. I'm not complaining. I'm honored to represent the district, but it's not nearly as easy as some people think that it is.
Well, or staying on top of everything for sure.
Right. You've got to know what's going. So like you got to know what's going on with student loan rates. You got to know what's going on in Egypt. You got to know what's going on in Syria.
Yeah.
You got to know what's going on with the new changes in the Dodd-Frank bill. You have to understand what's going on with the exchanges that are being rolled out for the Affordable Care Act and 25 other issues. People stop, and so you got all this volume of information spewing out. So what members of Congress tend to do is prioritize the issues that are on their committee or that they have a special passion for. And so if it's not an issue in front of your committee and it's not an issue you don't have a special passion for, you may not know that much about it. I would bet you that there's a lot of members of Congress who don't know what the Transpacific Partnership is.
And they have to rely on, I suppose they have to rely on their colleagues to feed them information then. And I suppose that can also be very selective, can't it?
That's absolutely right. And so that's why the Progressive Caucus is taking this on, because we believe that our trade agreements, coupled with a few other things, are mostly what explains the stagnation of American wages and our job crisis.
Yeah.
So at this point in the negotiations, I mean, what is the best action at this point? I mean, do we have to get out there, get enough people to lobby? What? Go ahead.
The best action is to continue to do things that we've already begun to do, which is like on this show, you guys giving us an opportunity to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a big help. And then just doing the show on this topic is huge, because I believe if people know what's going on, they'll do the right thing. Americans have a sense that the trade deals we've been doing don't really benefit them. They may help Walmart, they may benefit some international retailer, but they don't really help the American people. And folks know that. And so one of the most important things to do is to let people know what's going on. That's why we did the forum over at the Labor Center.
Yeah.
So and it was a full house in there, and people were saying, well, what should we do? What should we do? And I said, well, what we should do is, first of all, know what's going on.
Yeah.
And then we need to make sure more people know what's going on, and then we need to get this thing into the news cycle, and we got to get responsible journalists asking questions about it. What is it? Why is it? And what's going to happen? I need to explain to you guys this thing, and you probably already heard it, but just
say it again.
Repeating.
Say it again, brother.
They're repeating. This Trans-Pacific Partnership is not going to come. There's not going to be some long period where we debate it out like the immigration bill or the Affordable Care Act or Dodd-Frank. What's going to happen first is we're going to pass Trade Promotion Authority, something called Fast Track, and so once we pass that, then the way to pass TTP is to very quickly to just pass the bill, and it will be in a form in which no member of Congress can offer an amendment to it. Voted yes or no, up or down.
Whoops.
I guarantee you there's going to be all kind of promises about all the great jobs that it's going to produce. Of course, they can't ever prove that any bill like this produces jobs for Americans.
Don't we have a track record in NAFTA too, don't we?
Well, we have NAFTA, we have CAFTA. Well, we just passed the South Korea trade bill. And you know what? We're already at our trade deficit with them has increased.
Oh my.
So we just passed this trade bill with South Korea, and in fact, 2 labor unions supported it. One was the UAW, and one was I can't remember the name of the other one, but they were saying that. But now already we've got an even bigger deficit, even with regard to autos and beef and stuff like that, with regard to South Korea. So these trade bills don't really help America, right?
Right.
They don't. And And quite frankly, we need to really ask some questions. Now, I don't think people should take the position that we're against trade. We're for trade, but we're for trade that is fair. I believe American workers can compete with workers anywhere in the world to make world-class products and services, but that's not really the point of these trade deals. The point of these trade deals is to make it is to reduce regulatory burdens, reduce requirements to safeguard food safety, reduce requirements to safeguard the environment, labor standards, and it's kind of more of a race to the bottom than to actually promote good, fair exchange of goods and services around the world.
Congressman Josh Wise has something to add to this conversation.
Yep, I just wanted. Hi, Congressman. I just wanted to chime in on fast track because this is really important. In all of the major trade agreements that have passed in the United States have passed by first passing what's called fast track authority, or as they've tried to rename it to maybe do a little rebranding on it so it doesn't sound so ominous, trade promotion authority. But fast track, essentially what it does is Congress votes to suspend the rules of the Constitution and designate the president an agent of Congress. And they can do this because of a Supreme Court decision that happened in the early 20th century.
Really?
Yep. So essentially what they're doing is taking the elected branch of government out of the equation when it comes to trade negotiations. So it gives the president authority, but really the United States trade representative, who's appointed by the president, has the authority to negotiate these agreements, submits them to Congress, and Congress has to take an up or down vote within 60 to 90 days, no amendments, and very limited debate. This is a bill that has to pass Congress. Congress has to grant fast track authority before it can actually happen. So that's our first major legislative battle in Congress, is to beat fast track. The last time it passed was in 2002 and extended through 2000. It expired in 2007, but it only passed by 3 votes in Congress under the Bush administration.
Wow.
So this is something where if we can beat fast track authority, we can either one, stall out the Transpacific Partnership outright, or at least have the opportunity to advocate for, as the congressman said, fair trade, so that we can grow our economy, grow good jobs here in Minnesota, protect, have a robust domestic market, and then also have an export market where the workers in those countries are respected.
If you were to, I'll let you have a chance, Steve, in just a second. If you were to be able to go. Circumvent that, and be able to get the 3 votes that you need to overpower that. Then is there another step? I mean, can the administration then come in and do anything else to then say, well, this doesn't matter, Congress has to vote on this? What
would happen is that they would have to go through the normal treaty ratification process, which is a 2/3 majority in the Senate.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
And given that, according to every survey that's been published since NAFTA was enacted, more than 2/3 of the American public were against that. It's very unlikely that it would get ratified.
So without fast track, NAFTA would never have been put into place.
That's correct.
That's essentially right. Steve, Steve Fletcher of Minnesota 2020?
Yeah, I just want to say this is a really hard issue to organize around and for people to get their heads around, because so much of it hasn't been released, because so much of it's being done in secrecy. And so we're kind of asking people to rise up around something that we're not quite sure. We're not quite sure what it is, but
it doesn't sound good.
But I think it's really.
Can I jump in on that point?
Congressman Allison.
You're right. Yeah. So this is why we did the forum. This is why the show you're doing today is important. And in a few days, the Progressive Caucus in Washington, D.C. is going to have a summit with labor leaders where we have a real talk about what we're going to do about this. It's an organizing challenge. And I want to just tell everybody, folks can understand this. They can understand that, look, companies want to make stuff for really cheap, paying people $1 a day around the world, bring it here and sell it to you for $25 or $100.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. People are like, oh, I get it. I mean, it's not that really hard to understand. We've just got to put our time, energy, and resources into educating people, and then we can do this thing. The key to success here is education. Now, sometimes you need to persuade people, but other times you just need to tell them what the deal is. There's a reason they want to keep this thing in secret, and that's because they know that information is their problem.
Congressman, would you? How does our Minnesota delegation in both the House and Senate stand on these questions? Because it seems to me that because of our signal, we have to ask members of the state of Minnesota, citizens of the state of Minnesota, to contact their congressperson and their senators to discuss that with them.
Well, that's right, and I think that...
Where do they stand right now?
You know, I haven't done a head count. I have to be honest and tell you, I cannot tell you, which member stands where on what.
Well,
but
some politician you are. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, as I understand it, Congressman Ellison's the only one talking about this. Nobody else has made a real public pronouncement.
Why
about
is that,
it.
Congressman?
Well, you know what? Let me tell you, I got to work with my colleagues, and so I don't publicly criticize them unless they really get way out there.
Yeah.
But I will say this.
Or the Republicans.
Well, here's what I'll say. Oh, okay. So thank you for that reminder. Eric Paulson is a very firm supporter of it.
Ah, okay.
He's all for it.
So that means we got to get to him.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, but I don't know where other members are, and so it's a good idea to ask them. I mean, just say, look, this Transpacific Partnership thing is coming up, and this Fast Track Promotion Authority thing is coming up. They're linked.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you on both of them? We want to know what your position is. In fact, maybe we get a reporter to do a story and ask, where's the Minnesota delegation on this? I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to know on both. Yep. And so that's where I stand.
And Andy, if I could just chime in real quick.
Please do, John.
Yes. One of the big challenges with things like NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership is that they're being negotiated by Democratic administrations.
Yes.
So while progressive members of Congress have historically opposed free trade agreements, I think we can say that no vote is safe at this point because the administration will be pushing members of Congress to very heavily oppose
of their own party.
And that's why we need to be organizing right now, and why we really appreciate the congressman's efforts with the Progressive Caucus to get as many vocal members of Congress taking a stand on this as possible. And we've been organizing around the state to do that. And I would just encourage your listeners to go to mnfairtradecoalition.org, find out how they can get connected with organizing efforts in congressional districts around the state.
So, Josh, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So, Josh, if I am a member of Congress and I want to see an increase in the minimum wage, and I want to see NLRB have full power so that it can operate to protect labor rights, and I believe in collective bargaining, but I believe in those things, but at the same time, I'm trying to push something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, am I not giving with one hand and taking away with another?
Very good question.
Well, if I understand your question correctly, Congressman, you're saying how do we advocate for high-wage jobs in the United States? And I would say that it's like Steve talked about earlier, is that we need this upward spiral. And if you raise wages, that'll allow people to consume products that are produced locally, produced by small Minnesota firms, and that will further drive up wages, increase, boost the local economy, and further that upward cycle. And I think Steve has probably a good answer.
Go
as
ahead,
well.
Steve.
But yeah, you're absolutely
Steve Fletcher.
Absolutely giving with one hand and taking with the other, right? It is not okay to be good on domestic issues and then hand away your right to be good on domestic issues, at the same time. And that's going to be the long-term legacy of this administration if it's allowed to happen. It's going to be the long-term legacy of this Congress, and we have to.
Steve, just to prove your point. When we all can sit around and talk about things we like about Bill Clinton, but what's the one thing that we kind of don't like? Well,
NAFTA.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. That's right. I have to tell you, we have to close it off now. Congressman Ellison, thank you so much for jumping into this conversation.
Thanks, Steve, Josh, Steve, you guys, thanks so much.
Really appreciate your coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Whoop, I think he hung up.
We lost him.
Thank you all, gentlemen.
Yes, we've had with us Josh Wise, who's the executive director of the Minnesota Fair Trade Coalition, a group also focusing on this subject for its organizational member and Minnesotans in general. Josh, thank you for joining us.
Thank
again.
you.
We'll bring you back and keep up to date on this. How's that?
Great.
Steve Fletcher is a fellow and a director of the Grassroots Strategy Division of Minnesota 2020. We're glad to have you there. And another think tank examining this agreement with a fine eye. Steve, it's so good to have you in the studio.
Thanks for finally having me.
Yeah, we get into that. Well, this all seems too large and distant to be directly affecting our daily lives, but it's clear that the impacts of these global agreements can devastate local economies and long-standing labor agreements and environmental regulations, protections. This means that we must monitor these developments closely, let our representatives everywhere know what our limits are. Never let up the vigil on your government. Once more next week, scrutinizing the nation's new obsession with spying in the name of national security. Don't miss it.
Truth to Tell is a co-production of Civic Media Minnesota and KFAI. Links to audio and video archives of our past shows are available on TTT's own website, truthtotell.org, as well as KFAI.org.
And thanks to our crew, Kel Heil, our engineer, videographer Craig Stelmacher behind the lens over there, production assistants Mark Kerner and Raylyn Prokaski, and we welcome a new friend here today, Amanda Norman, who was sitting watching us for this whole deal.
We'll be back again next week for another edition of Truth to Tell. Until then, I'm Michelle Ali-Marati.
And I'm Andy Driscoll, and remember, as always, please do take care of each other.